You're now listening to the MVP podcast where we explore the business of sports. My name is Courtney.
And I'm your producer, Jimmy.
And on this episode, we talk to Andrew Descovich, who is the director of media strategy for Zoomph, which is a tech company that breaks down the analytics behind partnership marketing. So all the big brands that you see when you're watching sports or when you're checking them out, your favorite team, a favorite athlete on social media, they take all of that information and they find the dollar value of the reach that these teams are getting through the content they put out. Is pretty interesting stuff. And on this episode, we try to unpack why sports teams are so valuable. And we learn about the technology they use to identify the next big star, or to find out if the money that these teams are spending on partnerships is actually returning any value, or how much value to be exact. There's a lot of stuff here about March Madness, women's sports, Caitlin Clark, PWHL, you name it, they get into it. And it's really interesting because of Andrew's background working with MSG, CBS, and WWE. Lots of great sports talk in this one. So definitely tune in and stay to the end because his favorite athletes are some of the most iconic of all time.
Yeah, you know, it's all about the numbers, baby. And in sports business, we bring you the numbers. I was surprised by some of the stats that he dropped. Andrew definitely knows the numbers and he dropped them. So do us a favor, increase our numbers by hitting that subscribe button, hitting that like button. And if you're on Spotify, leave a rating. And if you're on Apple, leave a review. We want to hear from you. All right, without further ado, here's our conversation with Andrew.
Can you give me the elevator pitch for what Zoomph is and what partnerships intelligent reimagine means?
Great question. Zoomph, we are a SaaS company. We measure exposure through social, through broadcast, through the screen. If it's a sponsorship, it's going to be measured. We measure all things from A to Z, and we give you a value and we give you context. And I think that's our differentiation. We're going to give you the number and we're going to help you make sense of the number.
Yeah, so basically, in this day and age, sports and entertainment, those teams, the values of those teams have been going up in almost every direction you could look, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, more emerging leagues like the MLS, the NWSL, WNBA. It's everywhere. And that's just the leagues and the teams. Players have been becoming bigger brands than the teams that they play for and the leagues that they're in. So you guys basically gather data points on like the reach and engagement that all of these players, these leagues, these teams are getting, and try to turn that into a value so that the sponsors can see what they're getting from working with them. Is that right?
Yeah. A great example is what Caitlin Clark did this year is unprecedented. It's incredible for sports in general, but also helping to show people what we've known for a very long time, the value in women's sports. And so this year alone, Caitlin Clark generated just over $14.2 million in value via social media. She reached over 533 million impressions on social media. One person in college. So when we start talking about the power of sport and the value of these properties, we were talking about the major five right there early on, but the emergence of NIL, the emergence of the power of women's sports and the growth of women's sports, Caitlin Clark's at that forefront. Like, that's real money. That's millions. That's 500 million impressions from one person.
Yeah,
at college in Iowa. Like, that is badass.
Yeah.
You just can't beat that.
In the middle of Iowa, too, where that's not a big metropolitan area. It's definitely a phenomenon that couldn't have existed before social media.
Could not have. It could not exist without what social media has done. It has made sports accessible and has made student athletes their own brand at a higher level, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about college athletics, if you weren't in an area, I'm a big St. John's fan. The reason that the Big East was relevant in the 80s and 90s, they were on the East Coast. they had the media markets pumping up Felipe Lopez, right? You think about that stuff. Now you can have an athlete at any college. Steph Curry went to Davidson. How many people could point to Davidson on a map?
Yeah. Yeah. So he literally put them on the map. And I think, broadcast has changed a lot because of this same dynamic with social media. And it's been, I don't want to say it's become fragmented, but it's dispersed the power where now instead of these big conglomerates owning 100% of the power and you can't even become known without them saying so, the athletes have their own platforms, the teams have a platform. There's so many different choices for the consumer.
One of the things I think at Zoomph we've worked such a long time is on what we call our earned value, right? What O&O is owned and operated, right? That's what the team puts out. So if you were talking about Iowa women's basketball, right, that's their own handle. So much more value comes from the earned. What social media has done is created a lot of influencers. Think about all these beat writers that have, yourself included, right? A platform that you can share a message, information. You now have a entry point into the sports industry, whether that be a reporter, marketing, right? Our job at Zooms is to track that, right? Caitlin Clark's being picked up not just by the 5 major, media, players. It's all the small market. It's all of these influencers on social. That's what we need to make sure as us in sports, we're not just tracking what ESPN's doing. Right? Yes, ESPN's driving a lot of value. There's a lot of strong influencers who aren't ESPN.
Right. So who uses this information? Is it the teams going to the brand partners and saying, hey, look, we get X amount of reach, and then they use some data such as yours to try and put meaning to that and say, if we get so many viewers on broadcast and we get so many engagements on social, that's actually going to be worth X amount of dollars. What's the actual use case? And when somebody's using your software, what does that look like?
Yeah, we actually have both sides of that equation looking at it. So on the side that you said, and that's really probably what the general public sees our platform a lot is, it's a sports property, be that a team, comes to us and say, hey, we want to track our TV visible signage and we want to track our athletes. And we want to track it, one, just internally so we know how much reach we have. If you're a Big 12 school, how do you compare? But also then to go to market and say, hey, brand A, we are number 3 in the Big 12. We've reached X number of impressions. And this asset, right, let's say it's courtside rotational you at a Iowa basketball game, right? Hey, this is how much value we picked up. Would you be willing to pay, X, Y, and Z for that? Here's our justification in the data, right? That's the probably the way the general public sees how to use the tool. We actually use it where we have brands come to us and they'll come and they'll say, hey, Zooms, here's our partnerships. Can you measure it? So one, it's an audit, but 2, then they go, hey, is this good? You're measuring all the other courtside rotationals, right? So a great example could be if a brand changes their color schematics, right? And you've played in sports, so the LED signage could be really blurry, right? A lot of text on screen is blurry. They may not be getting that from the property. They come to us and we say, hey, here's a really good example of what you should do. This worked for another team. Try it for your property. Or, hey, here's an athlete you may want to keep an eye on, right? One of the things when we talk about this NIL space or influencer, right? Which athlete should you be partnering with? We have a really cool proprietary tool called Audiences. And what we do is it gives you a lot of psychographics. So we can see, and at WWE, we use this of saying, who is a Logan Paul follower, right? So when a brand came to us and say, hey, when we signed on Logan Paul, he performed X to us versus what our general superstars were doing, right? Same with college sports, right? This athlete A is from X region. Here's some of the psychographics about him that may, pair nicely with your brand. Or, hey, you're looking for someone who's a tech savvy. Athlete B is really tech savvy.
Right, right. So you're basically able to pair them up with the influencer who matches the demo that they want to target with their product.
We can do both sides of it. So we can measure a campaign and we can help give you direction before you even start a campaign. That's where we pride ourselves on being a solution from A to Z, right? We're not just going to vomit numbers out at you,
Right.
because I'm a firm believer that, like, no matter how good your data is, if you can't communicate it and you can't create action, like, my number one elevator pitch for anyone who wants to get into data is don't just report the data. Report what it means, and then how do you create action out of that data, right? What does the number mean? And then what can you do with that number? And once you can start doing that, creating action, that's when data is really valuable, right?
Yeah,
like, if I tell you that Caitlin Clark did 500 million impressions, great. So what?
Right.
Let's create action out of it. Hey, you should be talking to brand X, Y, and Z. This is what they can gain from being a partner, right?
Yeah.
Action with data is more valuable than just having data.
Totally. The insights is what matters most. And I think you mentioned earlier, like, you have a background coming from traditional broadcast. So before this technology existed, how were brands measuring the reach that they had, or what did it look like before technology like this existed? You worked with CBS, you worked with MSG, WWE, you've been with huge companies. Like, how did they do things before this type of technology existed?
No, I've been fortunate to be at the forefront of this. I credit the places I've worked for investing in research for it. It was very different. A lot of what we did was manual. We'd walk around the venue, take photos. We would do surveys. Hey, did you see exposures that going through here? I recently showed someone back in 2011, we did a Twitter versus viewership report where we were going to run some sweepstakes to see if that would help drive viewership to games. Like, manually, I'd go into Twitter, export out all the Twitter posts, get the timestamp, go to a viewership report and start matching it one by one.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, how many viewers came in 5 minutes after we posted that? All manually. But that was the forefront of that. See, at the time, that was creative, right? Oh, you're going to do sweepstakes to win to get people to tune in for your games. Now that's the norm. Social media is a driver for fandom. It is where most people are going to consume their fandom.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, some people don't even consume whole games. So seeing the reach of even the clips or the highlights or the athlete themselves who might be on a very successful team, but you want to see that athlete in training, you want to see them in the photos of the score recap and all that kind of stuff. You got to be able to capture all of that.
I was super blessed. I joke I joined the Knicks at the best time. I joined during Linsanity. And for those who are from New York or know about Jeremy Lin, if you want to know what New York looks like when the Knicks are good, Linsanity was it. I mean, every night was a win for us. I mean, every night we were having more viewers than Jeopardy. Like, we when people ask, New York is a basketball town. And when the Knicks are good and when Jeremy Lin was happening, I saw the power of just the whole city coming in, tuning in, watching full games.
Right, yeah.
Right?
End.
At the end, that's not the norm. You don't tune in at 7 o'clock and watch to 9:45, right? You've got to feed the kids. You're probably on the train, the subway, you name it.
Yeah.
It was appointment viewing.
Yeah.
And I think we don't get a lot of appointment viewing anymore, right? And part of that is social media. It has given us the ability to consume our content on the go, right? Think about how much now Twitter a few years ago we're running with, right? The NFL. You think about all of this.
Yeah, yeah.
It is no mistake. Content is consumed on the go.
Right.
We all live busy lifestyles. You can also get your score updates on the go. It wasn't that long ago you used to have to text a phone number to get your score updates.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But, right? You remember that you texted and it would be like,
right.
UNC versus Duke, here's your score as a text message.
Right. Or it was easy for you to say, hey, I'm not at home. Nobody call me. Nobody tell me. Don't tell me that you're surprised or you're excited. Just my phone's on silent till I get back to the TV.
But that is where today, as a business, we're seeing the growth, right? Broadcast is always going to be the foundation. And I would argue with anyone, broadcast is always the foundation of a sports property, right? Good broadcast deal. What we are saying broadcast now is much more fragmented. And Courtney, you alluded to this. Just because we say the term broadcast, we don't mean linear broadcast, right? You now have players coming in who are helping to drive fandom and sports. And I use example of some of the streaming. Look at what Netflix did without even having live content, right? You think about their relationship for Formula One, right? And all of these things. They drew how many people to Formula One?
Right.
Right? Drive to Success. You think they didn't have live content.
Yeah.
Right? They created the Brady dynasty, right? You think about the documentary for Tom Brady. They didn't even have live content at the time. You think about how Apple, Amazon, all of these are using very selected sports properties to get into sports without having to overdo it, right? You think about Thursday Night Football. Great deal.
Right.
That's not just about viewership for Amazon. That's about consumers. They're gaining insight about, you are an Amazon user, right? You're buying things every week. They know what kind of ads to give you. When we talk about programmatic advertising, right? Who better at it than Amazon?
Right. And because of the platform that they have, I believe they're actually able to serve up, they have different sets of ads. They might have 4 ads that are running at the same time, but based on your buying preferences or your user profile, you get a different one served to you.
100%. That is programmatic. It is the future of advertising. I would even make a bold statement to say programmatic could be the future of sponsorship. And you've seen certain sports dabble in this, where you will see, UFC did this a few times, you will see a different sign on the mat on your television than I would see.
And so those are the on the actual mat where they have the sponsors.
Virtual. So like the NHL does what they call DED, right? Digitally enhanced dashers. What you're seeing on the screen is not physically what's in the venue. It's being virtually embedded into the feed.
Right.
And so you're going to see a lot more sports dabbling in that because they can do efficiencies, right? We talk about advertising, it's about efficiencies. Right. When social media first came, everyone went because they had really good CPMs. Just think about sponsorship catching up to that. Hey, you want to run, this, you're going to get that on-court logo, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I think I've noticed that too, because sorry to cut you off, but I'm thinking in the Canadian Football League where I played, they used to paint the logos on the field. But then let's say they painted the logo on the 35-yard line. When the game is down by the goal line, that logo's not getting any TV time. So now when it's digital, that logo moves with the play.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
So you think about that company called PVI, they created the yellow line, right? That's what you're seeing, right side in the red zone, right? They make it red. The New York Giants have a Mercedes logo for theirs.
Right.
All of these digitally enhanced signage is probably going to be the future of sponsorship. It's no different than programmatic advertising right now.
Yeah. And so the experience that we have when we're browsing around on our computer is going to come to a television set or an iPad or a phone near you. That's how we're going to be consuming our content, tailored to our buying history and our demographics likely.
Yeah. The amount of data, and this isn't to be a conspiracy, go get your silver hat and put it on. Your data's out there. And it's being used to create better experiences for you. As someone who has worked with a lot of different data sets in different properties, we use data to help make good decisions. When do people come to events, right? When do people go use the restrooms? These seems like novel ideas, but like, you've been to a sporting event. Do you want to wait half an hour to go to the bathroom?
Not at all.
Right? Do you want to wait half an hour to get into the venue?
Not at all.
No. So if we use data about when do people get into venues? When do people walk at certain points through different venues, right? We can make staffing decisions that say, hey, you want to make sure you're highly staffed at this event, right? And this event may skew more for this type of food. So make sure you're selling more hot dogs, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So all these sports is not just a viewership data. The data is all consumer behavior. And it's helping to make your experience better, whether you notice it or not.
Yeah. So can I ask you, what is the pathway for somebody who's trying to get into, either the data analytics side? I think the bigger umbrella is business intelligence. Like what is business intelligence, and like what are some of the lower level, entry level jobs that are on that side of the sports organization or just in the industry?
No, that is the $1 million question. 10 years ago, when I was joining, I don't know if BI was a term, right? We called ourselves the insights team. I don't even think that's it anymore, right? It's business solutions, business operations, business intelligence. The first thing for anyone doing it is curiosity. You have to be curious. I'll admit this to day one. I was not the best math student in the world. I liked numbers. They were curious. I love telling stories with numbers. And so your first step for anyone who wants to get into field is curiosity. The second recommendation is find any sports property and offer to intern. Every team, we've talked about it, from minor league baseball to the emerging sport, they need BI. They would love to get people who are data curious, who are willing to roll their sleeves up and just start playing with data, right? Mm-hmm. And part of that is also putting on yourself to start learning basic coding. You don't have to be the best coder in the world. Understand the terminology, understand the practicality of it. And so when you start interning, any organization is going to want to take a chance with you, because the hardest thing to find is somebody who's curious and willing to play with numbers.
Mm-hmm. And so would you say that there are certain like code languages to learn, or there's certain types of software to learn? Or if you're a student, you're about to graduate from like a sports management program, like what would be your first step? Just try to get in somewhere, or would you tack on a couple of certificates?
You know what? I think that's a good question. I personally have never put a lot of stock in the certificate. That doesn't mean they're not valuable. I think they give you experience and show at an entry level, like some level of credibility to the skills that you've acquired. I think there's a lot of free things out there. There's a lot of R. R is one of the general scripting languages. You can take a bunch of free courses on R. You don't have to spend money to get into research. I always tell people there's plenty of data out there, right? There's plenty of viewership data out there. There's plenty. If you reach out to Zoomph and you say, hey, I'm working on a class project, can you help? We're going to help you, right? There's not a data company that wouldn't want to help you. And so as a college student, if you are passionate about it, reach out to these companies. Ask to get access to their data. See if their data is in your school library, right? I was a student at Columbia, right? I've taught courses at Columbia. We made our students work with the librarian to use the available data sources. They're at their disposal. Play with it. Become curious. So when you start interviewing, you're going to ask questions. Hey, I was using platform A and I saw this. And you come to the interview knowing something about that property. I'll tell you right now, if you show up to an interview and you start throwing out some numbers about that property, you're going to land the job.
Yeah, because that's a different level of research and preparation for sure. So I have a question. Teams are obviously investing in the business intelligence, whether it's trying to prepare inventory for certain types of games, whether it's going from regular season to playoffs, or whether it's benchmarking the performance of their on-field assets and their digital signage versus the rest of their league or whatever it may be. they're getting a massive return on that if they're doing a good job creating a great product, attracting a lot of attention. So they must also spend a lot of money on that kind of service or that kind of software. So what are some of the biggest teams in, sports spending on getting this kind of data?
Great question. I like to pride myself and think I've worked at some of the biggest ones. I don't think it's always about the dollar amount they spend. I think it's their willingness to use data. We have a bunch of clients at Zoomph who are curious about the data, and they ask us questions and they challenge the data and they say, how can we make it better? Whether that, hey, can you look at this logo as a branded logo and just look at content on a branded sense, not just TV visible signage. And let's start looking at data points differently. Those are the people who I say take data very seriously. And I've been super fortunate to work at properties who start with data, then come back with questions. In research, you do research first, then you come up with your hypothesis, right? You don't just start guessing and hoping something works, right? You gather information, then you start making some thoughts. When sports properties start with data to make their decisions, that's when it's serious. And you don't have to spend a lot of money. You just have to be committed to using data and helping to challenge your data providers, right? You think about a lot of the news with some of the legacy broadcast solutions out there, and people saying, oh, it's a sample of only 40,000 homes, right? We need to make this stronger.
Yeah, and you're referencing when they try to get the viewership of traditional broadcast. They don't actually have every single person's household, but they take a sample size and they extrapolate out.
And exactly. And so, like, one of the reasons I joined Zoomph is our founder, Amir Zanozi. He said to me, Andrew, I don't want to be working in the thousands to start projecting viewership. I want to be in the millions. And I want to be measuring it in so many different ways, right? Through the television box, through cable boxes, different modes of measurement. And when he was telling me that, that was music to my ears, because I was someone who was committed to challenging the status quo of how can we become better at measuring and not just sitting on what the norm is.
Right. So would a company, let's say, comparing the Dallas Cowboys, which is the biggest sports team in the entire world, would a company like the Dallas Cowboys, would they spend $1 million on intelligence, or are we talking about?
No, they absolutely could. And when we talk about intelligence, it's not just signage intelligence, right? Ticketing intelligence, player analytics, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about BI, right, they usually go hand in hand. Those people, I can tell you early on, people who are doing business ops were also doing player ops. Now, we've put a bigger emphasis on player ops, right? And so now there are dedicated resources. But
like Pro Football Focus or Stathletes in hockey.
I think every organization spends slightly different, but to say there's organizations who are spending in the million range, I would say 100%. I think brands are doing it too. Brands who are investing in sports are also doing it. And you think about some of the biggest sponsors in sports, they're investing millions of dollars. Why? Because they want to make sure their investment is working, right? If you're going to go spend X millions of dollars for a partnership, why not spend 2% to make sure it's the right investment, right? You wouldn't just go invest in a stock without, maybe buying a report on the company. Right.
Doing a little research or
doing a little research.
Checking the K1 and the Q1. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So sponsorship and media advertising is no different. Brands are spending just as much money because they want to be informed.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because there's a return on that investment. And I guess that kind of gets to the question of, with the sports properties becoming so valuable, the reason that these properties are valuable is because of their reach. Would you say that, you said broadcast is where the foundation of everything, but is it really just because that is the best way for companies to reach their customers is through sports teams. Is that what really drives the value of these properties?
I think there is an emotional connection. There is something sports does that very few other mediums can do, right? You definitely have your favorite sports event, right? One of my favorite is when I was a little kid, showing up to a Met game with a Pepsi can to get in for free.
Oh, they did that?
They did that. Now that seems like a basic sponsorship. But for me, there's a relationship I've now created with Pepsi of bringing in a can to go sit in the outfield.
Yeah.
Right? You think about some of the examples. I'll give you a good one. Another Met example, right? Andy Chavez catches the ball over the wall against the Cardinals in the playoffs, right? Steals a home run. The logo on the outfield wall is AIG. That's synonymous now with Mets history, right? Andy Chavez jumping over the wall. That's there, right? You think about some basketball ones, right? You think about with Kia, right? And Blake Griffin, right? Jumping over the Kia, right? That's synonymous now. There's an emotional connection to that. That is why brands invest in sports. You are connecting with people on a level that's personal, that they are now, and fans appreciate, and I think this is where I'm a huge advocate for brands investing in women's sports, because I think fans of women's sports, first of all, there's not a lot of clutter right now as it relates to sponsorship. Your return on your investment is just so great. Think about that relationship, right? I have little nieces who are big soccer fans, right? They are going to be growing up, myself included, going with them with these brands who are helping to elevate women's sports. And to me, like, there's no better purpose than a brand doing well and also making a really good investment. Like, I argue with people, women's sports is not just something, oh, it feels good, so I'm going to invest in it. No, women's sports is a valuable asset for you to invest in because it's going to make you money.
Yeah. It's commercially, it makes sense.
Yes, it does. I argue, find me properties that have less clutter and greater return on your investment.
Yeah. And I mean, if you even look at the opening weekend for the NWSL, I think it was KC Current. They had like 21 million impressions. And the social value of that alone was $500,000 just off of that. So any, like the sponsor on the front of the kit or down to the naming rights, the stadium, all of those things get a lift from these women's sports, or any sport, but the women's sports specifically. They just were historically undervalued. So you could have bought in for what's compared, when you compare it to, NBA or NFL, you're buying in for like pennies on the dollar and getting these incredible results from a pure business standpoint.
From a pure, what we've just been starting to pull March Madness for the women's tournament. We're talking about 500,000 viewers on average right now.
Yeah.
500,000. This is not small, numbers. 500,000. You find me an NBA team that's doing 500,000 every night.
Right. And I think even if I remember correctly, on, was it Christmas or Boxing Day, the numbers in the NBA, like the best games were getting like 1.5 million. And that's the best of the best. And we're talking about average over the course of like 60 games that are happening in March Madness.
I mean, think about if you invested in Nebraska volleyball.
How cheap would that be relatively?
Right? That's got the amount of return. I mean, I couldn't tell you volleyball team. I could tell you about the women's Nebraska volleyball team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They were the talk of the town in the fall.
That's true. They played in that football stadium.
Okay, in a football stadium, sold out hundreds of thousands of seats.
Yeah.
Like, that's, there is no longer this women's sports isn't here. It is here. It is powerful. And like here at Zoomph, like we measure it because we know it's valuable. And like we tell people, you should be looking at this. Like Find me other sports. You get as much return on your investment. You just can.
No, you can't. And so, I think along with the current rise of the women's sports, I think the NIL thing, you mentioned it earlier. I think this is a time when the athletes themselves are actually able to capitalize on their value that they're driving in a different way. So, do you find trends of people who are just starting to become popular before they really hit the zeitgeist? Is that a thing too?
Yeah, I believe you don't need a lot of followers to have a really good brand.
Yeah,
Right,
talk about that. Talk about
right.
that for a
You
second.
don't need to be Ronaldo or Taylor Swift to be valuable, right? If you have 10,000 followers, but you are the best, you know, give you a sport, luge, right? And your 10,000 followers are luge followers and they're super loyal, right? And you partner with a brand that makes apparel for luge or makes equipment, right? You are an influencer. Yeah, you don't have Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift followers probably aren't the right, group of people.
Mm-hmm.
With the emergence of NIL, and I think it's all athletes, you are your personal brand. You have a story to tell. You are unique. That's not some cliche thing, right? There's something about you. You're right. I worked on a class at Columbia called Olympians as Brand, and one of the things we said is all these Olympians have stories. Paralympians, they have stories as well, right? It's maybe they are a single parent, maybe they're raising children. How are they using their elite athletic status, right? You think some of these Paralympians and how amazing it is. Their parents, they are elite athletes, and right, their story is unique. They've gone through some turbulence, right? And they've conquered it. What brand doesn't want to ride with one of those people, right? You think about that.
Yeah. So, wow, yeah, that's powerful. I guess that's even a nod to the athletes who are not the headline makers. Just because you can be somebody who's like, I look at myself, all right, because that's who I know best. I played 7 years professional football and I was never an all-star, but I feel that I developed a strong enough personal brand locally to have some opportunities when I finished playing. Is that basically what you're trying to say, is that don't underestimate yourself and you can build a personal brand that will present you with opportunities?
I had the privilege to sit in class with Andrew Hawkins. Andrew Hawkins played in the NFL, right?
He played in the CFL too.
CFL too, right? That is a man who worked on his brand, and look at his post-career, right? Look how many ventures he's now in. That is somebody who if you're in the NFL, you're really good, but he wasn't a Pro Bowler.
No.
But he had a really strong brand. He knew what made him special, right? And coming out of Columbia, he's done really well. He's been in movies, starting up companies, right?
Working with LeBron James.
Right. Working with LeBron. Everyone can have a personal brand as an athlete. You have to make sure you're authentic to your brand, right? One of the things, look at some of the early LeBron content he puts out, right? That is authentic. It's him taking the photos. The sneakers aren't really straight. They're crooked. LeBron James, his content is curated. It is perfect for it, right? Nike's not going to let him put out a sneaker that's crooked and covered. Think about how many athletes are authentic. They are raising a child. They have played in the CFL. I'm sure there were not glorified days at the CFL. I'm sure you were bunking up with multiple people.
I'll tell you about riding commercial flights and a lady saying, "Hey, can you hold my baby for a second?"
Right? But that's your brand. Like, that is why you're here today, because those experiences, what makes you authentic to you, you've got to now, every athlete has to find a way to, one, get their story out there, and then cultivate it to find brands that you should align with. And that doesn't mean just taking every dollar that comes your way, right? If a brand doesn't align with what you are, don't take that money. That's short-term gains that will ruin your authenticity.
Andrew, man, I love your energy, and honestly, what you guys are building over at Zoomph is one of my favorite things. I follow the account on LinkedIn just because the infographics you put out, it's got the information that I'm looking for. I'm trying to see the rankings of who are the top 10 most engaging athletes or teams, or in this tournament or on opening day, what was the reach that this team had? What was the social value that was created? I love seeing those kinds of stats. As somebody who's a sports fan and who works in sports, I think that stuff is priceless.
Right. So we just put out some content today, credit to our marketing team, about the men's March Madness, and that UNC put out just over 130 posts. It generated 20 million impressions already and is worth over $500,000. Right? So in what, 4 days of basketball we're talking about?
Wow.
So that is what we love doing. We live it. When I joined, leaving the property side to come here, it's what you're talking about. It's those infographics. We tell a story of why sports is valuable.
Right.
And you may look at it and go, one post doesn't generate a lot of money. No, but you know what? Over time, multiple posts do. And then you start getting efficient, right? So if you look at this in our report, we have number 4 on that list. So number 1 is UNC, probably not shocking, right? Number 2, Duke. Number 3, Tennessee. Those are powerhouses, right? Powerhouses in sports. Number 4, Creighton.
Who?
Creighton. One of the Big East. There you go, right? That's why this stuff is amazing. Creighton's number 4, right? They've reached over 13 million impressions in their content. Credit to that social media manager, right?
Yeah, they need a raise.
Yeah, they're beating out number 5 Purdue Boilermakers, who are doing just as well. They had nearly 11.5 million impressions, right? But that's what we love doing. We love working with teams. It can be professional teams, it can be college teams, and saying, hey, here's how much value you're getting for your social content. Here's what you can do to make it even better. Increase your engagement rates, right? Hey, put more infographics about score updates. People want vignettes. I tell this, sports fans want access. And you probably know this. They don't want just access to players. They want access to the business. They know it's a business.
Yeah.
Right? They want to see the behind the scenes. They want to know how the sausage is made, right?
Yeah, that's it.
They do.
And also they want to see the dollars.
They do. It's
they
exciting.
Want to see the dollars. Exactly.
Right.
So I have a question then. How many people work at Zoomph? Because you guys are cranking out, like, you guys are becoming the piping of the data that runs all of these teams and whatnot. Like, how many people does it take to run an operation like that?
Great question. I am a nobody that gets to stand on the shoulders of amazing people. We have nearly 40 employees. We are growing because I think everything we've talked about, the space is active, it is expanding, and there's a need for more data. And so, like, we may not be several hundred employees, but let me tell you, us 40, we're dedicated to it. And I'm super fortunate to get to work with people who love what they do.
Yeah.
Like, we love dorking out over this stuff. We love dorking out about women's sports. And that is genuine. Like, we get to say, hey, how can we help Nebraska volleyball tell the best story possible?
So what does it take for a company to work with Zoomph? Do they need to have a certain size? Are you work with certain leagues? Like, what does that engagement look like? Because for myself, like, I work for a Canadian Football League team and a Canadian Premier League team, which is a 6-year-old league, got, less than 10 teams. What's the hurdle for you guys to work with a team or a company or a league?
As low as a hurdle can be. And I say that we work with teams you don't even know they've existed yet, right? They may be in an incubator state, right? We've worked with properties like the NFL and MLB, right? Some of these major sports leagues who are billions of dollars. You don't need to be making money to be good with data, right? And so you think about some of these emerging leagues, right? They may not have been profitable year one. That doesn't mean they didn't need data, right? If you talk about, right, women's hockey league, right, we talk about it. They need data just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, PWHL has been making their fair share of noise. And I think every time I look up, it's an attendance record being broken. So I'm sure they play on a bunch of different networks. I think they do YouTube, they do linear,
Yep.
they've
They
got
have
a lot of stuff
RSN relationships, YouTube. Yeah, exactly. And so you don't need to be a big company. As I said from the get-go, you just have to be committed to data, right?
Yeah.
If you're committed to data, we can make it work, because there's the beauty of social media is you don't need to spend a lot of money to make noise.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Andrew, man, this has been amazing. And I appreciate you taking the time. I feel like we could nerd out on and geek out on this for a long time. But there's one question that we always ask our guests on this, because this is a sports podcast. I gotta know, you're a New York guy, so I kind of, in the back of my head, I feel like I could guess at least one of the people you're gonna say. But who are your 3 favorite athletes, any sport, any era?
Whoa, good question. I will start with number 1, Henrik Lundqvist. Ooh. And he is the greatest goalie of my lifetime that I got to watch. But as a person and his commitment to the Garden Dreams, and what I got to see when people weren't watching, and his true kindness, next to none. Mm-hmm. He did things for kids, writing. The man is as good as it gets. And so, like, to me, he is number 1 and will be number 1, because not just because he's the king on the ice, in the public, he's number 1. Following that same tone, I would be, Eli Manning's number 2. I don't know if I cannot say Eli Manning. You give me 2 Super Bowls, you get to walk on water. But another guy, he embraced New York. He was committed to New York. That's what you want. You want people committed to New York. We're going to be hard on you. We're going to laugh at Eli Manning because he fumbles and he's goofy at times. He brought us 2 Super Bowls. New York's about winning. And when you win, we love you. So Eli's number 2. Number 3, look, I can say Mike Piazza, greatest Met that I've got to watch. But no, I would put out there one, this is going to be a tough one.
There's no shortage of them in New York. Man.
No, I mean, you could go Carmelo Anthony.
Oh, I love that. Because it's March Madness right now. If we're talking Syracuse, Carmelo.
Yeah, like that first day when Melo came into the Garden, it's goosebumps. I can watch that video a million times of Al Trudwick calling in, Melo's home, and Alicia Keys, playing in the background. You can. That's Hollywood there for that. I'm going to give out a interesting one here. I'm a big St. John's fan, and Meta World Peace. Like, wow. You know what? Find me someone who embodies New York more than the Meta right now, right? God, killed it in college.
Yeah.
As a St. John's fan, I love that, right? Then he comes to the NBA. It's about a hustle, right? He's hustling. He's one of the. So I'm going to throw him out there too.
I love that. And honorable mention to Stephon Marbury.
Oh, everyone had the sneakers. Yeah, the sneakers. You could afford them.
Yeah, exactly, man. He was a people's champ, man. I love that guy. So, Andrew, man, appreciate you taking the time to do this. Where can people learn more about Zoomph, and where can they check out all the amazing infographics and stuff that you guys post?
I highly encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. We put out amazing content. We also have a blog on our website, zoomph.com, ZOOMPH.com. Follow the blog. I also encourage, if you're curious, reach out to us. There is a contact us. Got questions? Think we can help you? Just let's play with numbers together.
Love that. That's awesome, man. Appreciate you taking the time. This is awesome. I will definitely be contacting you because I love numbers, and especially when they got that funny S with the line through it. Those are the numbers I like.
Yep. Yes. Me too. Me too. I like it in my bank account.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Always.